What's up, guys? Welcome back to the MMA meeting. Let's talk with the Weasel podcast, where we talk all things MMA. And I hope you guys are having a good one. So we had some fights that concluded, the UFC fights and the Devin Haney versus Lomachenko boxing match, which were all actually pretty good fights. The Mackenzie Dern versus Angela Hill fight was a bit wild, I'm not gonna lie, but it did show Mackenzie Dern's capabilities up against a veteran like Angela Hill. Her striking was a bit too wild and chaotic, and she went for so many hip tosses. That part was hard to watch. Seeing that technique hurts me every time I see it, unless it's done correctly, like back in the day, Hector Lombard threw some really good ones. Ronda Rousey has some good ones as well, but most fighters just don't execute them well at all, and it always puts them in very bad positions where they can get their back. Even Angela Hill almost got Mackenzie Dern's back. Angela Hill, of all people, getting Mackenzie Dern, of all people, in nearly a back take. Crazy. But the thing about Dern is she is powerful. She is actually very fast for the weight class. If she straightens up her striking more, she could be a problem because her Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is absolutely nasty. No one's going to be able to handle her on the ground. So if she tightens up on her striking and, more importantly, works on her wrestling, things can get very problematic for her opponents. The thing that a lot of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artists lack is a good takedown, which is crazy to think about because you believe it's logical. Someone who has a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu advantage against everybody in the weight class would want to develop a way to get down there, but for some reason, a lot of BJJ fighters just don't try to develop the wrestling at all. A lot of them focus more on striking. Even Islam Makhachev said it. A lot of these BJJ guys, they're good on the ground, but they're not a problem if they don't have wrestling. Because how are they going to get the fight to their area? How are they going to get you to fight their strengths? They need to take you down, or you take them down, but the majority of fighters are not going to take down a BJJ fighter. I was talking about this about Brian Ortega as well, who's been developing his boxing more than anything else, but it should be the wrestling that these fighters who have crazy submission abilities to develop their takedowns. Not these hip tosses, man. These hip tosses don't work like that. These hip tosses are not nearly as efficient. Anthony Hernandez finishing Edmund Shahbazian, he did have a pretty troublesome start, but absolutely wore down Edmund the whole fight. His boxing looked crisp as well, putting together great combinations. His ability to cut off Edmund was actually pretty nice. Anthony Hernandez seems to be coming into his own, and to be able to sometimes outstrike Edmund Shahbazian was actually very impressive from a guy who many thought would be better with his grappling skills ever since he submitted Rodolfo Vieira. So now him beating Edmund Shahbazian, he probably should be in the top 15 at this point. Edmund, on the other hand, it's pretty sad for him because he's just not performing well at all. I think it was ever since that Derek Brunson beatdown. I won't say he hasn't been the same. I think he's just been exposed. I think these fighters know exactly how to beat this guy because early on in his career, he was knocking everybody out in the first round. The only time he went to a decision was against Darren Stewart in his UFC debut, and he almost lost to Darren Stewart. To then see him knocking out like Brad Tavares and submitting Jack Marshman. He had a good highlight reel going there for like 3 fights, and then he got thrown against Derek Brunson and got hammered to an oblivion. This guy just got beat down badly by Brunson, and now he's 1-3 in his last 4 fights. 3 of those are by finish, and all of those are in the second or third rounds. He's never gotten finished in the first in the UFC. It's always later, which shows that his cardio is a big weakness of his. I don't know how long he stays in the UFC. I honestly think he might do better right now to build himself up outside the UFC. I think the competition is a little too hard for him. Joaquin Buckley, this is what I wanted to talk about. So Joaquin Buckley went down for his welterweight debut, and he knocked out Andre Fialho, who is no joke. Fialho's a dangerous fighter, and Buckley put him down with the head kick, man. And he looks so much better at this weight class because in the middleweight division, those guys are way too tall, way too long for him. What did you see happen repeatedly when he was in the middleweight division? He had to chase down his longer opponents and reach with his punches, which caused him to be open for counters. And not only that, he was so much easier to head kick and stuff like that because of the way that he wants to make his way in by ducking his head constantly. So it became much more of a habit of his. Against the welterweights, that's not going to be much of a thing because he's the same height as most of these guys. So it's much more of a leveling playing ground when it comes to his skill set. I think the welterweight move was very good for him. Now he could really sit down on his combos. He doesn't have to chase and keep moving with his strikes like that. He could put strikes on his opponent while not opening himself up too much. Really love the move from Buckley, man. Then what about the highlight of the whole card? Diego Ferreira, who was on a 3-loss streak, by the way. Lost to some really good guys like Dariush and Gillespie and Gamrot. Well, after a 1.5-year hiatus, he comes back against Michael Johnson, who's been looking pretty good lately, and KOs him in the second round. 1 punch, right overhand to the jaw, an exact point-for-point, frame-by-frame replica. Perfect image of how Josh Emmett knocked out Michael Johnson the exact same way. And Michael Johnson also showed the exact same reaction to the punch. He dropped his left hand down to his waist, opened up that side, and Emmett and Ferreira had the exact same form for their punches. I believe Ferreira's punch was a little bit more straight instead of curved inward like Josh Emmett's. Regardless, like nearly the exact same punch, exact same reaction, and exact same knockout. That is one of Ferreira's greatest wins of his entire career. That hiatus definitely did him some good to get his mental back in track, because losing 3 times the way he did could really hurt someone's psyche. He needs a top 15 opponent next, because he was top 15 for a while. He fought guys who only elevated even further than he did. So him losing to Dariush and Gamrot, who are now like top 8, honestly doesn't even look that bad these days. What about Slava Claus knocking out Makhachev? Makhachev is a pretty good striker, and Borshev, who everyone calls him Slava Claus, he put down that left hook into a right straight, and I love the way he did it because he knew that his left hook was going to get blocked. Makhachev had his right hand up to his head, and Borshev put all of his power into that left hook, not to exactly hurt Makhachev with it, but it's to readjust his guard. By knocking into Mahachev's right hand so hard like that, it's going to force his whole body to square up in front of Borshev, and that's when the right straight goes down the center, right inside the guard, and puts him down, man. Crazy knockout. Carolina had a pretty good win. Gilbert Urbina had a good win. It's tough to see Latifi lose, man. I love that guy. Natalia Silva is someone that a lot of people have to get familiar with. Her striking is insane, man. Very fun to watch, extremely technical, so fast and powerful. She had one of the greatest knockouts of last year with that spinning back kick to the face. And the way she put down that 1-2 on her opponent and then threw up the body kick after. I mean, she is so good, man. And that flyweight division is eclipsing bantamweight at the moment. Flyweight is definitely better than bantamweight at this point. And with the talent that we're seeing, like Natalia Silva, Alexa Grasso, of course, Branchfield, Tyler Santos, don't have to mention Valentina Shevchenko, of course, this weight class is so much better than bantamweight. It's not even close. Themba Gorimbo had a big knockout win. Flush overhand on Takashi Sato, who's a veteran in the game. Good win and good card overall, man. It was actually enjoyable. And when we go into the Devin Haney and Lomachenko fight, so there was a lot of controversy on that decision. A lot of people believe that Lomachenko won the fight. I held a poll on Twitter, and the vast majority of people believe that Lomachenko beat Devin Haney. Boxing is so weird to score. I didn't really know exactly who I thought won the fight because the fight was very close. And the way you have to score boxing is very different than MMA. It's not just damage and stuff like that. In fact, defense, aggression, and ring generalship are all there as well. You got to score all of it. And it makes it so hard to actually know. And it makes it so hard to actually score because both guys were defending a lot of the punches. Both guys had good pressure. Both guys were aggressive somewhat. Lomachenko would be backed up, but then he would be able to reverse their positions, and that would establish his ring generalship. But for constant pressure, it was mostly Devin Haney, of course, because he is the bigger man. I thought Lomachenko won as well, but I also acknowledge that the fight was really close. Now, 116 to 112 is not right. That was insane. I don't know how that judge got 116 to 112 for Devin Haney. I believe I had it 115, 113 for Lomachenko, but both guys were extremely skilled in the fight. The technique shown in there was enjoyable, where Devin Haney was throwing a lot of body shots, which is an interesting game plan against Lomachenko, who likes to move his head a lot, but at the same time, he does move his feet and create very sharp angles on you. So those uppercuts to the body versus a lot of Lomachenko's step-in jabs and stuff. Lomachenko landed a lot of shots up top, but Devin Haney landed some big body shots throughout the fight. Both guys stumbled a couple times here and there, and honestly, you do have to give Lomachenko so much credit for the fact that he's fighting bigger men. A lot of times, that aspect people just forget about. Like even the time Canelo lost to Dimitri, it's not to diminish Dimitri's win, but Canelo deserves more respect for even fighting a guy bigger than himself. Same thing here with Lomachenko. It's something a lot of guys don't want to do in any combat sport, but they do it because they're proving that they're just too good for the guys in their own weight class. So they have to put themselves at a disadvantage in order to have somewhat of a competitive fight, or they just get beat and then they'll know their place. I was thinking about making a Devin Haney Lomachenko scoring video, but that thing would have been like 2 hours long. I'm not gonna lie. So boxing fights are 12 rounds. That's 36 minutes of action. And like 8 or 9 of those rounds were close. So we have to be looking at 8 or 9 of those rounds while counting hundreds of punches. And then after the punches, now we got to look at defense. How many punches were blocked, missed, slipped, parried, deflected, all that stuff. And then we got to look at aggression. And then we got to look at ring generalship. I was really thinking about doing it, but then I was like, wait, this will be 2 hours long. And I don't think people would care to watch a 2-hour breakdown on that. But man, that would take a lot of time to do. That would take many days to finish. The thing about these breakdown and scoring videos are they take a lot of work to do. It's a lot. And I see some comments where, you guys do acknowledge like the work that goes into these breakdowns, and I put them out very quickly. I don't think people actually understand how difficult it is to put out breakdowns that quick, where most people put those kind of breakdowns out in a week, let alone in a few hours, right? I'm putting like a week's work of editing and analysis inside like a few hours. That is not easy. I know some of you ask like, how am I able to finish all that editing and all that analysis in such a short amount of time? Honestly, I would say with the editing, it's experience. I've been editing for like 15 years. I've been editing since I was a little kid. Like, I understand the whole thing. It's almost like rinse and repeat at this point. It's like in any profession, right? Any job that you have. In the beginning, it's kind of difficult and it can be a bit overwhelming, or you think about it a bit too much when you're actually working. But then after like a few years, let alone 15, you don't even think about it anymore. You're just doing it. It's like the whole thing where you tie your shoes. You don't actually think about every motion you do to tie your shoes because you've done it a million times. That's kind of how editing is for me at this point. And when I did start making videos, I started making it after I already had the whole editing thing down. It was already like second nature to me. That's why for so many years I've been able to put out breakdowns so quickly. And then when it comes to the analysis of it, honestly, I would say training. When you train for such a long time, you do understand things so much better. Everything's so clear where you don't have to go back and watch things too many times to understand it. Most of my analysis come from watching it live and then one rewatch, and that's it. There are a few fights like the Petr and Corey Sandhagen fight, which was insane, where I have to go back a few times throughout that fight to really get some things down because of how technical it was. But most are not as technical as that fight. So for most fights, the analysis comes from the live watch and then one rewatch, and that's it. I've talked with some like other content creators and they've asked me the same thing, and they think I'm crazy for that because I have no script. I literally just click record and start talking after I watch the fight twice. And in other news, Conor's going to be tested by USADA pretty soon, so that means that his fight with Chandler will probably be pretty soon. If Jones fights in November, I think they'll have the Conor fight in December. There's no way they're going to have them on the same card. Conor has to headline. And at this point, so does Jon Jones. These are two of the biggest names in the UFC right now, right? There's three fighters that absolutely have to headline their cards. Conor, Jones, Adesanya, because they draw so much more than everybody else. So Conor draws like 1.5 mil on average at this point, or like 1.2 mil, which is so insane. Nobody in combat sports right now, individually, is drawing that much. Then you have Jon Jones, who draws on average like 700,000, I believe. I don't know exactly what his Cyril Gane fight drew, but I did see some rumors and some numbers thrown around that it was 1 million or something like that. Jones is a big draw. If he's drawing like 600,000 to 800,000 on average, that's crazy. That's a big deal. And then Adesanya is kind of similar as well. He's like 700,000 on average. The next guy after all that, it's probably Oliveira or Colby or maybe Usman. But Oliveira and Usman both lost their belts when they were drawing those big numbers. So you would have to think that their star power is also decreased. Whereas Colby was never the undisputed champion. He was drawing big numbers without even a belt. So he's not really in a different place. Oliveira was drawing around like 500,000 against Dustin and Gaethje, who also helped up those numbers. Depending on who Usman fought, he was either drawing a lot, like over 1 million against Jorge the first time, or against Colby he drew 700,000. But when he fights Leon and Jorge the second time, some of the reports are saying like 500 to 600,000, so it's a bit less. The only pay-per-view number that we know from Colby is when he fought Usman. That drew 700,000, and that's it. He was such a big star that they trusted him to headline against Jorge Masvidal, and now they're giving him an immediate title shot after only one win. That just kind of tells you the star power that Colby Covington has. And again, he's the only guy out of those three right there that didn't lose his undisputed title. He's always been a draw the whole time. Possibly you could throw up Dustin Poirier. He's a pretty big name. Some people say Volkanovski or Islam. In terms of pay-per-view, they don't draw too much. They drew a pretty good amount together in that super fight, but it was 500,000, which is what Oliveira regularly drew as a champion, and that was under what Colby drew against Usman. And that's just a regular championship fight rather than a super fight. So if I were to guess who would be right after them, Colby's a little bit iffy. Is he regularly drawing like 700,000? Did he draw the same against Jorge? If that's the case, then he's around like Adesanya star power. So maybe Colby is above Oliveira and Usman when it comes to star power, but these guys are below what Conor, Jones, and Adesanya regularly draw. So that Conor and Chandler fight is going to be really interesting. And the documentary came out for Conor. My voice was in it, which was very strange, but pretty awesome, right? They just had like a little snippet. Something I was talking about back in the day for Conor's press conference with Khabib. Remember when Conor was just like downing his bottle during the press conference and he was going after Ali. And speaking of fighters that aren't fighting, what happened to Rose Namajunas? What happened to Rose? It's like she vanished. I mean, I saw her coach one fighter. She was in the corner of one of the fighters, but is she done? Because Rose should be in her prime at this point. She's 30 years old, right? She should probably be in the middle of her prime. And I know that she did start fighting in 2013, but she has 16 professional fights. A lot of them were championship fights and against high caliber fighters. But man, it seems like a lot of fighters these days, I don't know if you guys notice as well, like a lot of fighters seem to take a lot of time off while they're in their prime. But they build up so much when they're getting there, right? When they're young, they take up a lot of fights really quickly. Once they hit their prime, they slow down big time. Because usually when a fighter hits their prime, they're at a higher ranking or they're the champion and things slow down for them a lot. And then for some reason, when they get older, they want to take up more fights again. When you would think it would be the other way around. You would think once they hit their prime, that's when they start taking fights like crazy. I did put something together earlier today. I was putting together like the greatest fighter of each era. Now, it is a bit ambiguous because what defines an era? When does it start? When does it end? How many years is an individual era? Well, I think they kind of differ depending on what's going on, how the landscape is shifting. For example, like the golden era, where there were so many dominant champions, Anderson Silva, GSP, Dominic Cruz, Cain Velasquez, Frank Yeager. The light heavyweight division was changing hands a lot, but all the others had a long dominant champ. So that era lasted a long time because the landscape was not shifting. These guys stayed on top for like 7-8 years. It was crazy. And we've never seen that before or after, besides with like a few guys, maybe Fedor. So what I put together was the first generation, the first era was, of course, when Royce Gracie was around. So that I would say is like the pioneer era. You could say it's Royce Gracie. Some will say Bas Rutten or Frank Shamrock because all these guys were at their top in the 90s. So like from 1993 to like 1999. Royce Gracie did not fight too often. I did pick him, but I can see Bas Rutten or Frank Shamrock being above him. So those three definitely dominated that era. The next era is like from 2000 to 2005. This one I picked for Fedor Emelianenko. So you had Chuck Liddell during that time. You had Randy Couture. You had Vitor Belfort. You had Dan Henderson. All these guys were at the top of their game during that era, but nobody was as dominant as Fedor. Nobody had a streak like he did. He did start to slow down in like 2007, but from 2000 to 2005, Fedor was the best fighter in the world. Even though there was a lot of good candidates there. Liddell, Couture, Vanderlei, Shogun for a little bit, Hendo, a lot of good fighters there, but I picked Fedor as the best fighter of that era. Then you have from like 2005 to like 2012. This is the golden era. This is where Anderson Silva, GSP, Jose Aldo, Dominic Cruz, Frank Yeager, this one, these guys were the champs. And they stayed champs for such a long time. I believe making that the longest era. And for that era, it's back and forth between Anderson Silva and GSP. I ultimately would go with GSP because he did finish the era stronger than Silva did. Silva lost by the end of it, whereas GSP didn't, and both guys were neck and neck for that entire time. If you pick Anderson, you can't really argue against it. If you pick GSP, can't really argue against it. Those two guys were at the top. They were the best. Then you have from 2013 to 2018, I would say. This was the Jon Jones and Demetrious Johnson era. Both guys were at the top that entire time, whereas all the other weight classes were exchanging champions. So technically people would say, oh wait, Jon Jones is in the same era as GSP. That's not necessarily true. They fought during the same time for a period. They were on top at the same time for like 2 years. And the only reason why Jon Jones' reign started at the end of GSP's reign was because Jon Jones became the youngest champion in UFC history. He was so good, he won the belt after like 2 or 3 years from his UFC debut. And he was like 23 years old. When GSP won the belt against Matt Serra, which started his long reign from 2008 all the way to 2013, Jon Jones is 21 years old, right? GSP was nearly 30 in the prime of his career, whereas Jon Jones made his MMA debut. He started his first fight in the same month that GSP beat Matt Serra for the belt, where GSP became a 2-time champion, beating Matt Serra. Literally that same month, a week prior to that, Jon Jones fought his first MMA fight. It's not the same era. The only thing that can make it look that way is because Jones accelerated his MMA career and became the UFC champion less than 3 years from his MMA debut. People don't know that Jon Jones fought 7 times in his first year of fighting. And in that same year, he made his UFC debut. 2 years later, won the belt. It is not the same era whatsoever. Jon Jones' reign started from 2011 when he was 23 years old as the youngest UFC champion and went all the way, still continuing to this day, and he's just not as active anymore. So I would say the era started in maybe 2012, 2013 or something and ended anywhere from 2018 to 2020. And the greatest fighter of that era, I would have to say, is Jon Jones. There's really only two fighters you can even contemplate, and that's Jones and Demetrious Johnson. Both these guys became champions and dominated during that time span. Demetrious Johnson achieved the most title defenses in UFC history, where he won the belt in 2012, defended the first time in 2013, and lost the belt in 2018. So this is why I like to say from 2013 to 2018 is kind of where that era was. Jon Jones expanded a little bit before and a little bit after. So he can mold that era maybe around Jones' time, or he can mold it more around Demetrious Johnson's time, considering the fact that Jon Jones won the belt so young in his career, which is such an anomaly. And he's still going to this day, which is still an anomaly. Like, that's not normal for most fighters, so I don't know if we can mold it around Jon Jones, considering that he is a complete anomaly as a fighter. So I would say Jon Jones, the greatest fighter of the last completed era, and Demetrious Johnson is a runner-up. Everyone else there is a pretty distant third, whether it be Daniel Cormier, Stipe Miocic, Henry Cejudo, and now we're in the current era. I believe the current era is still going. So things can really change. It wouldn't be fair to actually pick someone right now because anything can happen to these fighters. Of course, the candidates that seem to be obvious, but again, things can change for these fighters. They could lose many times. Other fighters can eclipse what they did, and then they're out in the running. But right now, it looks like you have Volkanovski, you have Israel Adesanya, you have Khabib, you have Kamaru Usman. Some people also throw in Jon Jones, considering that he is expanding into this era as well. But he's just so inactive, I don't know if it's fair, because he only fought once in the last 3 years. But those four are definitely in the running right now. We still got to see what happens with Islam Makhachev. We got to see if Islam Makhachev could go on a crazy streak. We got to see what happens with Aljamain Sterling. Most people don't think he's going to become a double champ, but in case that he does, he pulls off the impossible, he would have to be right there as well. We got to see what Brandon Moreno does. There's a lot of fighters that could be candidates right now, but we're going to have to wait until the era ends. This era isn't too old yet. It's like at most 5 years long, whereas some of these other eras were like 7 and 8 years. So we still got a few years to go before we actually know who was the greatest fighter of this era. It seems like the argument right now is between Khabib and Volkanovski. That seems to be the biggest debate right now. So first era, it's either Royce Gracie, Bas Rutten, or Frank Shamrock. Then after that is Fedor Emelianenko. Then after that is GSP or Anderson Silva. Then is Jon Jones. And with that, let's go right to the questions. So the first question, we go to John Jordan. When talking about how good Khabib was, one knock against him is that he doesn't have enough title defenses. Had he not retired, do you think he'd still be holding the belt, or would he have lost by now? How many title defenses do you think he could have racked up? Thanks, man. No, thank you for the question. So it's something I brought up like a year ago when I was talking about Khabib versus Jose Aldo. The knock against Khabib was always against the length of his career. So he did have 29 fights, and he was 29-0, but he didn't fight the top echelon for that long. He defended his belt 3 times, had 4 title wins. He did fight really good guys: Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, Justin Gaethje, Edson Barboza, RDA, Michael Johnson. Like, these are good fighters. But in order to become like the greatest, like a lot of people say, he doesn't have that long list that GSP does, that Jon Jones does, that Jose Aldo does, that Demetrious Johnson does. Like, these guys have defeated so many opponents over so many years as champion. That's kind of missing from Khabib's record. That's what a lot of people see. So it is a fair criticism of how you look at it. But that's what it comes down to. How do you look at who is the GOAT? Do you look at title defenses? Do you look at competition? Do you look at dominance? All these things are going to include or exclude Khabib in terms of being one of the greatest. If you're talking about dominance, unstoppable force and all that stuff, never got caught up, never bled, never really got that hurt, had the perfect career when it comes to entering the cage, dominate the opponent, not get hurt, exit out with a ton of money, Khabib is that clear example. He is one of, if not the most dominant fighter we've ever seen. But when you go to the numbers, besides the 29-0, which is another crazy feat, there are only a few fighters that ever retired undefeated. He doesn't have the long title defenses. He doesn't have that long list of competition. And that's what it seems like he's missing the most, as John Jordan said here. But here's the thing. Regardless of what a lot of people say, if Khabib's the greatest or not, if he was active and never retired, would he be holding the belt still today? Or would he have lost? And how many title defenses would he have racked up? I don't think, even still right now, there is a fighter in that weight class that could be Khabib. I think Charles Oliveira and Islam Makhachev could be his toughest matchups, but Neil Dariush could be a little bit interesting here and there, but Overall, I don't see anybody beating Khabib. Even a lot of the welterweights would have a very hard time with Khabib. So looking at Khabib's activity, he retired in 2020. He fought twice in 2018, once in 2019, and once in 2020. If he would have kept going, he'd be fighting 1 to 2 times a year in the span of 3 years. So if Khabib kept going, he would have at least 6 title defenses, but probably 7 or 8. That's judging from his activity and him not losing. If he were to be able to do that, I think nobody would deny him as the greatest. This kind of ties in with greatness. We go to The Renegade. Hey Weasel, what does each champion in men's MMA need to do to become the greatest in their division, besides flyweight and light heavyweight? So it's going to come down to, what do you think a fighter needs to do to become the greatest? Does he need the title defenses? Does he need the competition? Does he need good performances? It's very subjective. But in my opinion, you need title defenses and competition. That's the basis of it. I mean, if you're scraping by wins with split decisions, that does go against you, so performance is also going to matter as well. But the main 2 things are title reign, which comes with championship wins and title defenses, and also the level of competition you beat. If you only defended against scrubs, it doesn't look as good. But if you're winning against good fighters, it changes how people look at your title reign. So in the heavyweight division, you're going to need to beat what Stipe did, pretty much. You're going to have more title defenses than him, because the guys that he beat were actually very good, and also have a strong list of competition. So 4 title defenses of good fighters. For the middleweight division, you're going to need some title defenses. Now, I don't think you need 10 like Anderson, because Anderson's total competition was not that strong. So if you get like 7 with good guys that you beat and have good performances, because the biggest thing that Anderson has as the GOAT is, of course, the 10 title defenses, and also some of the greatest performances we've ever seen. A few duds here and there, like Damian Maia, Patrick Cote, and Talis Latis, but was highlight reel knockouts and submissions. So if you get like around 7 title defenses, defeating good guys, and also putting on decent performances, you should be able to claim that above Anderson. For the welterweight division, this one's tough. This bar rose so high because GSP had 9 title defenses, I think 11 title wins in the welterweight division alone. Also beat very good guys. His performances weren't the greatest when it comes to knocking people out and submitting people. Didn't have a lot of finishes. So that's one area a champion can tackle. You're going to need a lot of defenses regardless. So let's say you get 7 or 8 defenses, and they all have to be against good fighters. The only way you can get by with less title defenses than GSP while being greater than him is by performing much better. You need some good finishes and dominant performances. Other than that, a champion's not going to reach it. For the lightweight division, with Khabib being the greatest, you need more than 3 title defenses. Because when it comes to dominance and performance, you're probably not going to surpass Khabib. It's going to be very hard to do that. You have to beat him in title defenses with also being good fighters. I think it's the most straightforward division to become the greatest, but the fact that it's the most stacked, it's actually much harder than any other weight class. So 4 title defenses, all against good fighters, and putting on good performances as well. You got to at least keep up somewhat with the dominance, or at least finish off the opponent in fantastic style. So Oliveira's fights, his defenses were not dominant, but his ability to finish the opponent the way he did complemented that, right? It did cover up that a bit. That's another thing that can go with it as well. So if you were a champion before and you had a few defenses, just winning the belt again and getting like 1 or 2 defenses again, you can become the greatest lightweight of all time. Very hard weight class to do that in though. Then for the featherweight division, you had Jose Aldo, who had 9 title defenses, 11 title wins, I believe, or 12, beat some fantastic fighters throughout his career. He didn't have like the greatest performances, so you don't have to like necessarily beat his title defense record, but you have to have a strong list of competition and finishing opponents as well. Unfortunately for the featherweight division, not too many champions are finishing a lot of opponents like that. I think I ran the numbers before. It might have changed, but this is a couple years ago. The featherweight division has the lowest finishing rate out of all the men's weight classes, besides maybe flyweight, I think. I'm going to update on that. Now for the bantamweight division, you had Dominic Cruz, who had 4 title defenses and 7 title wins. Beat some great fighters along the way. That is not going to be easy, but Cruz is not a finisher. So if you have someone who could finish fights and put together a pretty good streak there with like 5 or 6 title defenses, you can claim that spot above Cruz. The only thing lacking from Cruz is the fact that he didn't finish opponents. Then with the Scott Lindsay. Hey Weasel, how would you see Holloway versus Vasiliy going if Max was to move up to 155? I actually like that fight because Vasiliy is not too big for Holloway. In fact, Holloway might even be bigger than Vasiliy. I can actually see Holloway beating Vasiliy. I think his activity in a 5-round fight would drown Vasiliy in the later rounds. I think from the 3rd round onward, Vasiliy would be way too gassed to keep up with Holloway's output. Holloway's chin is going to save him for those first 2 rounds. He is one of the most durable guys we've ever seen. More durable than Gaethje is, and Vasiliy could not put down Gaethje. Holloway be able to show a similar kind of durability, if not even more of a durability there. Then the snowball starts to roll. Once the 3rd round comes, Holloway starts putting his hands on Vasiliy. 4th and 5th rounds, Vasiliy is done. I see him getting finished. Then we go to Black White Studios. How many defenses do you think Conor could have got at featherweight if he never moved up? For reference, he'd probably have a rematch with Aldo, then fight Frankie, then Max again. That's a really good question. So I definitely think a rematch with Aldo would have been a lot more competitive. I don't see him knocking out Aldo the same way, of course. If Aldo fought smart, sometimes he got out of his way to do some crazy stuff in the cage, right? That combo he threw at Conor McGregor, blitzed in without throwing leg kicks or feeling out the range, was something he's done before as well. That wasn't the first time, and Conor took advantage of it. I'm pretty sure he studied the Kenny Florian fight. But if Aldo fought composed, felt out the range, throwing a lot of leg kicks and stuff, I think the fight could have been back and forth a bit. Aldo's leg kicks would be so devastating against Conor. Conor is southpaw, but Aldo could easily throw the switch kick to the leg. But ultimately, whenever Aldo throws his hands, I see Conor countering him. Conor specifically took a countering approach to Jose Aldo. He wanted to bait him out in order to catch him with the left. And I think that would still happen anytime in that fight. Once Aldo explodes, which he does in every single fight, sometimes he gets reckless, he will get cracked to the chin again. I think in a rematch, it would have been longer down the line after a competitive back and forth in the beginning, but Conor does have the range. He does have the low side kicks. He had good head kicks and stuff like that. Everything to create an illusion on you in order for you to run down at him into his left hand. So I would have still picked Conor to beat Aldo in a rematch, but I think it would have been competitive. Now, Frankie Edgar back then was pretty much in his prime. I think Frankie would have won that. People say, Conor was too big for Frankie. I don't think that's necessarily true, because look what Frankie did to Yair. Yair is a big guy too, man. He's 5'11". I mean, both guys are skinny. But the fact that Frankie was able to do that against Yair, and he performed very well against Charles Oliveira as well, this is before Conor really made big advancements to his grappling. He had decent grappling shown in the Max Holloway fight, shown in a little bit in the Chad Mendes fight. The main thing was his ability to escape that guillotine, but Frankie's grappling skill with his pressure on top and his ability to keep the opponent under him the whole time would have gave Conor a lot of issues. Frankie would not gas out the way Chad Mendes did. Now, as long as it stayed on the feet, Frankie's getting destroyed. Frankie's chin would get cracked over and over again. But Frankie was very tough and durable back then. He was a hard guy to put down and keep down. And he was always looking to get under your legs, always looking to take you to the ground, even while he's hurt. In a grueling fight, Frankie would have beaten Conor. Conor versus Max Holloway again, I would have picked Conor. I think he has such a good style against Max. He kind of just understands the way Max fights, and he would never let him get out of second gear. So, how far would have Conor have gone? Considering he would have the Aldo rematch and then fight Frankie, I think he'll only have one title defense. But we'll never know. Conor always has that equalizer at featherweight. He was a different fighter in that weight class. He was so much more powerful pound for pound. Then we get to David Despit Dastamand. Talk about why Jon Jones was the only athlete in sports history to ever be allowed to fail repeated drug tests for steroids under a fabricated pulsing effect. If I'm not wrong, I believe now they actually changed the rules where everybody can have the pulsing effect. This might be why you're not seeing a lot of fighters getting caught. I don't know though, man. It was very strange because Jon Jones was the guy they kind of made this rule about. So he was like the first one for a reason too. The pulsing effect is now a thing because I let Jon Jones go by with it. But the only reason why there was a pulsing effect from Jon Jones was that he did take stuff before, right? I mean, the pulsing effect didn't come out of nowhere. He didn't just have picograms of something in his system for no reason. There had to have been something more before. I don't know what to think about the whole thing now. Was it actual picograms? Was it more than just that? There's a lot of conspiracy that will go around it. A lot of people think, Jon Jones was the cash cow. They weren't going to suspend him constantly like that, and they needed a rule around him, so they created a rule. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's going to leave a lot of people to speculate. So there's a lot of skepticism around that whole thing with Jon Jones. You would have to ask yourself, if it wasn't Jon Jones, if there was another fighter who popped for picograms of some kind of substance, would they have made the rule around them? I don't think so. I think the only rule the commission would have made was around someone like Jon Jones or Conor McGregor or someone who was a big name. That's what it seems like. There's probably so many other fighters that pop for this pulsing effect, and there was nothing made around it. No one even mentioned that it was probably pulsing. We only heard about it once it was Jon Jones. And that's the part a lot of people are going to be skeptical about. There was a Condor. Hey Weasel, with the recent victory over D-Rod propelling him into the welterweight top 15, how does Ian Machado Garry stack up against the guys still ahead of him? Thanks for the fantastic content, you're the best. Thank you for the question, man, and Ian Garry's looking really good out there. I was a little bit iffy on the prospect of Ian Garry. I mean, he had some close calls early on, but now he's performing very well, and that D-Rod win was crazy good. So he's ranked number 13. Yes, he's above Jack Della Maddalena, and the guys above him, so you have Michael Chiesa. I think he beats Michael Chiesa. I think he beats Neil Magny. I think he beats Vicente Luque. He's too clean, I think, for Luque. Luque will just run into too many of the shots. It's kind of crazy how far down Luque has fallen. At one point, he was like, what, top 5, and everybody was on that train? And now it seems like everybody's off it. So then you have Sean Brady. That would be a tough one for Garry. Right now, I would pick Sean Brady, but I think in the near future, I would pick Garry. Jeff Neal, too much for Garry. Wonderboy's too much for Garry. Shavkat's too much. Gilbert Burns is too much. Hamzat's too much. Bilal, Colby, Usman, Edwards, all these guys would be Ian Garry right now. But it's not fair to put him up against those guys yet, as he is still progressing. He's a young guy. He still has so much more to grow. Then we go to FK the system. Mousasi needs more recognition of his MMA career. UFC Gold, only thing that's missing. He has wins against heavyweight to middleweights. Legend. Gegard Mousasi is absolutely an amazing fighter, has to be recognized more for what he's done throughout his entire career. I mean, this guy's been fighting forever. He made his MMA debut in 2003, and he's still going at it. He lost twice in a row. I mean, of course, he's so old now. He's 37, and having 60 professional fights, he's not going to be the same guy. The only thing was, man, when he decided to leave the UFC, he left out as pretty much the #1 contender. He was going to fight Robert Whittaker, and that's when he left. He was on a 5-fight win streak against Chris Weidman, Uriah Hall, Vitor, Thiago Santos, which is looking a lot better now, and he beat Telis Latis, and that's when he left. So he was a 2-time Bellator champion. He beat Lomachenko over there, Rory McDonald, Lyoto Machida, and Douglas Lima. Had a very close fight with Lovato Jr. He was also the Strikeforce champion. He was the Dream champion. He fought from middleweight to heavyweight. People don't even know that he beat Mark Hunt and submitted him in just over a minute. And of all things, he submitted him with a straight arm bar. That's how crafty this guy was. He was one of the most versatile middleweights we have ever seen. From his ability to knock out the opponent in every which way, from all the ways he can submit you. The only thing that went against his technical style was the fact that he showed up in one discipline. He would either strike with you the whole time, or he would grapple with you the whole time, and it was hard for him to mix up the two against you. It was very hard for him to switch up his brain from striking to grappling in the same fight. That was the thing that really hurt him, because there were times where he was just trying to strike with the guy, and they out-wrestled him. Or he was just looking to grapple with the guy and they outstruck him. Where he absolutely had the capabilities of out-grappling or out-striking these guys if he was able to actually mix it up. But look at the fighters that he beat. He beat Hector Lombard, Melvin Manhoef, Jacare Souza, Mark Hunt, Renato Sobral, Ilir Latifi, Dan Henderson, Thiago Santos, Vitor Belfort, Uriah Hall, Chris Weidman, Rory McDonald, Lyoto Machida, and Douglas Lima. He beat some amazing fighters in a span of 20 years. This guy is absolutely a legend of MMA. Such an amazing fighter. They're with the 20 Wolf. Hey Weasel, hypothetically, if you had your own MMA organization and you had to pick 4 or 5 fighters in each division for your organization, who would you have? Pretty much all the best fighters. I don't know if I have to go down the list, but like, of course, in the heavyweight of Jon Jones, Sergey Pavlovich, Cyril Gane, pretty much all the best and biggest names of each weight class. Then with the Kevin Foster. Prime GSP versus Robert Whittaker at middleweight. Been here for longer than I can remember. Thanks for the years of great content. Of course, Kevin, thank you so much for the question. And this is a matchup a lot of people have thought about because not too many fighters can beat GSP. And could Robert Whittaker have the style to give him the hardest matchup? And actually, he might be the guy. Robert Whittaker is one of the best anti-wrestlers of the entire sports history. I mean, we're talking about like a tier under Jose Aldo. He's like that level. Him, Prime Robbie Lawler, Henry Cejudo, Jon Jones, all these guys have great wrestling defense. So with his ability to shut down the double leg from GSP and fight GSP in that karate-based style that they both have, with Whittaker being the bigger guy, having the more power, him actually being faster at middleweight. When they both fought at middleweight, Whittaker's definitely faster. He also has more variety to his striking. He's more of a new-aged fighter. More variety when it comes to his striking. GSP does have the jab, but the thing about Whittaker is he stays so far away from you when he's idle. When he's just sitting there, he's so far away. I don't know if GSP wants to reach all the way in there with the jab. The best way to hurt Whittaker is countering his entries and also catch him on his exits. For example, like Adesanya, right? Adesanya was not hitting him when Robert Whittaker was all the way out there. He was more so looking to counter his entries because that's when Whittaker throws his whole body at you. He's there for the opening a lot of times and also catching him on the exits as well. Look at Yoel Romero. When did Romero drop Whittaker? It was on the exit after Whittaker already engaged. These guys do not hit Whittaker that well from the outside. Even Darren Till. Darren Till actually was suffering from the outside because of those low side kicks from Whittaker. And Darren Till generally has a good style up against these karate fighters who fight from distance. And he had a hard time with Whittaker at that range while Whittaker was more idle. But the time that Till did catch him is with an intercepting elbow as Whittaker was running into him. GSP likes to surprise his opponents from distance like that while they're kind of sitting there with that long jab. It's so fast and there's like no tell that he throws it, but that's not going to work against the way Whittaker fights. I would actually go and say that Robert Whittaker has the most difficult style for a GSP to fight. And what's crazy about it is, the most difficult style for GSP is still somewhat competitive. That's how good GSP is. Then we go to Laugh T-God. I saw a recent debate online about Tyson Fury versus Alexander Volkanovski, no holds barred. People are 50-50. How do you see that fight going? Granted, Volk is 180 pounds and Fury is 270 pounds. Also, how does Aljo versus Volk go at 145? Tyson Fury versus Volkanovski is that's a very random fight. I can see how people say it's 50-50. Volk is a strong guy, but he is a lot smaller. I mean, we're talking about what, 14 inches apart in height, like 13 inches difference in reach. Tyson Fury can absolutely knock Volkanovski out with one punch. But will Tyson stop him from getting at his legs and getting him to the ground and choking him out? Also, the leg kicks from a distance from Volk are going to be pretty bad. Fury definitely doesn't know how to defend those. So calf kicks, easy takedown for Volkanovski could be there. And even though, yes, Tyson Fury is a big guy and he can use his strength to hold off Volk from taking him to the ground, but you got to remember that takedowns are not just about strength and using your weight against somebody. It's even using their weight against themselves as well. So if Volkanovski shoots low, well, firstly, Tyson's not going to sprawl. Maybe he's going to remember some of those drills he did with Darren Till and he will sprawl on Volk. But most likely in a heated fight where the adrenaline's rushing, Tyson Fury is going to forget about sprawling or anything like that. He might even throw a punch, while 5'6" Volk, who's standing straight up, is already as tall as Tyson Fury's hips. I think he can get Fury to the ground pretty easily. And as Fury tries to stand up like everybody does, and knowing that he is a big heavyweight, it's going to take him some time to get on all fours, try to stand up. Volkanovski can easily choke him out. But at any given time, Tyson Fury can knock him out with a good punch. Volk is a smarter fighter overall. He has more technique and all of that, as well as he used to be over 200 pounds. Now he's not over 200 pounds anymore, and you're saying he's 180 pounds in this scenario, so even though he doesn't weigh that much anymore, he still knows how it is to handle people much bigger than himself. Right? He was playing rugby, he fought in the welterweight division before, he trains with middleweights and light heavyweights and stuff like that, so Fury's a much bigger guy than anybody Volk's ever went up against in training and also in a fight. But Volk knows how to use the opponent's size against them. So I wouldn't put it past Volk to beat Tyson Fury at all in a real fight. So 50-50, I can agree with that. Or you could give actually Volk a little bit more of an advantage. Now, Aljo versus Volk at 145, we can only imagine Volk absolutely shuts down the grappling and just beats Aljo up on the feet. They're about the same height. They have about the same reach. So Aljo's not going to be able to rely on his reach to just tag the opponent from distance and then move away from them. And also, all of his takedowns could possibly get thwarted. Volk just went up against Islam Makhachev, and not only that, had the training camp against Islam, which made his wrestling so much better. And building upon that with another training camp for Aljo's wrestling, it's going to be hard for Aljo to get this guy to the ground. Even if he does, Volk has dealt with Islam. Volk has dealt with Brian Ortega. He's dealt with dangerous submission guys who are very good at getting the back. Aljo's best thing is getting the back and choking you out. And Islam could not secure that, being so much bigger and also having elite level grappling skill when he fought Volkanovski. Aljo is going to be faster, so maybe he can get to certain positions a lot faster than Volk and maybe get the choke in before Volk defends it. That's always a possibility. That's Aljo's way to win the fight. But I definitely would have to go with Volkanovski for sure. Every single shot he hits Aljo with, I think is going to disrupt everything Aljo tries on the feet, and then the desperate takedown's going to come out of that, and I see Volk defending all of it. Then we go to Deeg Former. Hey Weasel, just wanted to start off by saying that your content is not only entertaining, but it's also highly insightful and has greatly improved my knowledge for the sport since I first began watching it in 2018, so keep up the good work. I have a couple questions. Thank you so much, man. That means a lot. I have a couple questions. Number one, do you think that Islam Makhachev has the potential to have a lengthy title reign like that of Adesanya, or do you think that certain challenges like Poirier or maybe Dariush could defeat him? And then number two, if in some miracle situation, Demetrious Johnson has returned to the UFC, how do you think a fight with him and Moreno would go? Interesting question. So number one for Islam, how far could Islam go? So his next matchup is probably going to be the winner of Oliveira and Dariush, and both those fights are tough. If Oliveira fights smart and just Dariush's general style, those could be very tough matchups for Islam Makhachev. I see him getting by that second title defense. Then he would have to go up against either Dustin Poirier or Justin Gaethje. I think he definitely beats Gaethje for sure. I think that's one of his easiest fights, and Dustin is a tough one, but I think he beats Dustin as well. Dustin's boxing can give him some problems, but I don't know how long he could stop the takedowns. And also, Oliveira fights from a longer range. He's more of a kicker and a counterpuncher. So it's going to have to draw Dustin into actually engaging him, and that can open up Dustin for takedowns. There is Michael Chandler or Conor McGregor. And that's tough. He definitely beats Conor in my opinion, but Chandler's a tough fight. Chandler's very dangerous because he could shut down the takedowns in the first 2 rounds and land some devastating bombs on Islam, but there is a big gap in fight IQ. Islam is a lot smarter than Chandler, so I would ultimately have to go with Islam. So yes, I actually do think that Islam does have the potential to have a lengthy title reign like Adesanya. There are some tough matchups for him. Oliveira, Dariush, Dustin Poirier, and Chandler are all not easy matchups for him. He could lose to any of these guys. But if he keeps things intact, he could definitely have that long title reign. Now your second question, Demetrious Johnson versus Brandon Moreno. That's a very competitive fight because Demetrious is not in his prime anymore, but he's still very, very good. And he's fighting much bigger men than both him and Moreno. When it comes to the strength and the size of the current flyweight division, I don't think it's going to be anything different for Demetrious to handle. I do like Moreno's chances, but I would pick Demetrious to win the fight. I think the wrestling from Demetrious would be the biggest difference. Moreno is the kind of guy who likes to scramble for everything. If he gets taken to the ground, he's not settling on his back. He's going to keep rolling around. He's going to keep trying going for submissions, trying to get your leg, trying to get your arm. And I think all that gets shut down by Demetrious. Demetrious Johnson's top control is second to none. It's very hard to catch him in something when he's on top of you. It happened once to Tim Elliott out of nowhere, but that was while the fight was going to the ground. While he's already on top, it's going to be very difficult for Moreno. And even on the feet, it's a bit of a back and forth. Moreno has a lot of advantages there. I think he is overall the better striker. The body kicks and the head kicks with the jab are going to be the biggest thing for Moreno in that fight. Keep the distance on Demetrious Johnson, but Demetrious is such a master of range control these days. I don't doubt his ability to enter very effectively and land big shots and then change up to wrestling immediately. Brandon Moreno does not fight a lot of guys who's able to mix up striking and wrestling as well as Demetrious Johnson does. So I would ultimately go with Demetrious, but it would be a competitive fight. Then we're going to N1RO. Would you ever do a Who Really Won of Holloway versus Yair? I think you'll find it was much closer than many thought. I don't think I need to make a scoring video on that because Max definitely won. I don't know if there's any argument that Yair even won the fight, but it was a very close fight. So if you're saying like make the scoring video just to show that Yair got close, that's one thing. I think everybody agrees that Yair did get very close, and he came from a layoff as well, which was very impressive. But there's no way that Yair won that fight. I did praise Yair a lot from that fight because what he was able to do against Holloway of all people blew my expectations out the water. I always knew Yair was good, but off a layoff, I had my doubts of his ability there. But he showed up so much. Then with the Jay Canonosa. Hey Weasel, how far in the rankings does Colby go if he drops to 155 but keeps the same durability, cardio, etc. as 170? If we get the same Colby Covington at 155, easily top 5. There's no question about that. The only guy that beats him, I think, is Charles Oliveira. Islam could give him some problems. I think that'd be actually a very competitive fight. I don't think neither guy is able to hold each other down, so it'll be mostly a striking match, and I would favor Colby in a striking match against Islam. Not because he's generally more technical or cleaner. Islam is cleaner than Colby when it comes to just specific strikes, but Colby's output, unpredictability, and the way he's able to draw his opponent into his kind of fight is something I don't think Islam would be ready for. Oliveira with his ability to submit Colby at any given time and his ability to knock out Colby Covington on the feet, with Colby not having much power in his hands, I think will give Oliveira easily the best chance of beating him. I could see Beneil beating Colby as well, but does he stop the wrestling? And when he does get taken to the ground, would he be able to submit Colby? I mean, the scrambles he put on with Gamrot was crazy. So I would say Islam and Dariush are competitive fights. Oliveira, I would say, would be the one that would probably beat him because of the style. Everybody else loses. Most of them get completely dominated. So in a way, Colby Covington would be one of the best 155ers. And depending on the matchup, he could become champion and hold that belt for a while. Then what's a Banan? Hey Weasel, got a few questions. Number 1, do you think that Max Holloway will get another title shot, potential quadrilogy with Volk? I don't think so. Max is in his early 30s, so he's not that old, but he's taken a lot of damage and he's been fighting for a long time, so he's not there yet, but I think he will soon enough get to the age where he starts to decline before he gets that 4th fight with Volkanovski. And Volk is older than Holloway, so he might even retire before that ever even happens. But if there's no other contenders coming up, they might have to just go to Max by default if Max keeps winning. So right now they got Yair versus Volk, which is not an easy fight for Volk. Even Volk acknowledges Yair is the most dangerous guy he's ever fought. There is Ilia Topuria who's coming up. There is a potential super fight with Aljamain Sterling. And even another potential super fight with Henry Cejudo. and Volk still has the opportunity to go up to 155 again, I think Max's best move is honestly to move up a weight class. It's something he's been talking about for a long time, and he's getting at the age now where the weight cut at 155 would probably be so much better for his body. He just needs to get used to it, right? He needs to get used to holding that weight in competition. And just like we talked about before, Rafael Fiziev is the perfect opponent for Max Holloway. So no, I don't think Max is going to get the fourth fight with Volk. And honestly, I don't think a lot of people will be too interested in a fourth fight. We saw it 3 times, and the last one that concluded the trilogy was a one-sided beatdown. Max was not even close to doing anything against Volk in that fight, so Max should probably move up while Volk is doing his thing at 145. If Volk loses, let's say he gets head kicked by Yair, now Max actually has good chances here to fight for the title again because he has a win over Yair. So whoever Volk fights, Max should be hoping that the other guy wins. Your second question, does Oliveira have what it takes to beat Makhachev for the title if he wins over Beneil Dariush? Yes, he does. He just has to fight a lot more composed, and it's kind of like what we talked about before, where he should be more stalking Makhachev from the outside and just poking at him from distance, waiting for Makhachev to explode forward with something. Oliveira fought the opposite way, where he was super aggressive, left his chin out in the air, and completely underestimated Makhachev's striking, just like even Volk did. And these guys, all these guys are going to be fighting Makhachev, have to expect someone who knows how to strike. If Oliveira can probe out that left hand there, pumping jabs, throwing teeps to the body, countering with his right straight and left hook, while even trying to intercept Makhachev with those knees, Oliveira definitely has a big chance here because we saw how the grappling exchange happened between the two before Oliveira got knocked down by a punch. They were even with each other. Oliveira now knows how he performs against Makhachev on the ground where he's not rocked. At the very least, he can survive and make it neutral. But right now, that Beneil Dariush fight is not easy for him. Your third question, who is your favorite active fighter currently? It's Jiri Prochazka. Jiri Prochazka is my favorite fighter, and then I would say it's Charles Oliveira. I do like a lot of guys right now. Sean O'Malley's really grown on me, but for sure my number one fighter is Jiri Prochazka. I just can't wait until he comes back. And you say, would like to say thanks. One of the major reasons I got into the sport is because of the technicality with which you talk about these fights. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much. That's the mission, man. They'll get to mad extreme. Love your breakdowns, man. Thank you so much. Fantasy matchups. That's a lot of matchups. All right, I'll go through them really quick. Brock Lesnar versus DC. DC easily. Dustin Poirier versus Wonderboy. Wonderboy. Sergey Pavlovich versus Cyril Gane. Cyril Gane. Arman Tsarukyan versus Beneil Dariush. I'll go with Dariush right now. Guram Kutladze versus Rafael Fiziev. I would actually go with Guram. Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Prime Kamaru Usman. I'll go with Usman. Jon Jones versus Magomed Ankalaev. Easily Jon Jones. Jorge Masvidal versus Jeff Neal. Gotta go with Jeff Neal. Dominic Cruz versus Frankie Edgar. Right now, it's definitely Dominic Cruz. Fedor versus Miocic. I'm going to go with Miocic. Volkanovski versus Dustin Poirier. I'm going to go with Dustin. Dustin Poirier versus Jorge Masvidal. I will go with Dustin. Brendan Royval versus Amir Albazi. Battle of the Flyweight Dark Horses. I'm going to go with Albazi because even though as crazy and as dangerous as Royval is, he leaves way too many openings on himself. And you don't want to do that against Albazi, for sure. Alex Pereira versus Prime Anderson Silva. Oh, that is a tough one. That is the hardest one to pick out of all these. I'm going to go with Pereira, but I could be wrong on that. Prime DC versus Curtis Blades. I'm going to go with DC. And that is the end of the podcast, guys. Great questions, and I'll see you guys in the next video.